57talk.com. Gary Cubetta back with you again from Scottsdale, Arizona, and it's my pleasure to introduce one of the classic names in the history of professional wrestling, George Gulas. George, great to have you here on 57talk.com.
Glad to be on the air to talk to you. It's been a while that I made contact to get with you, and now it's finally happened. I'm glad to be on and rehash some old times and good memories and go with some things that now are just memories in the past.
We interviewed Frank Morrell yesterday, and it was a revealing interview, and you called and questioned some of the things. Well, you more than questioned them. You said they were out and out false, and I said, of course, George, I'll give you a chance to come on and clear the record once and for all. Did you hear the entire interview with Frank?
Yes, I did.
What was your initial reaction when you listened to it?
Probably in a capital letter with the word shocked. I mean, what was said among myself and others, I just didn't believe it. Something like that would have been said by him, but like I said, you never know what's inside a person's head and what they want to say and what they don't want to say.
I'll tell you this, George. When I interviewed Frank, I was a little surprised. I've heard bits and pieces of the Gulas story, the Jarrett story, and when he told me that you hated your father and that your father hated you, that really surprised me because I always got the impression that your dad was really trying to push your career in the ring, and that since your dad owned the promotion, you wouldn't want to. Hating him wouldn't really get you anywhere. Was there any hate between you and your father?
Not at all. Not at all. Of course, everybody has their disagreements, and that's in any family, but it was things that was ironed out after a few minutes or an hour or so, but we didn't get along on different ideas. But as far as me respecting my dad and loving my dad, I guess next to Jesus Christ, my mother and dad meant more to me than anything. And to the day my dad passed away, it was something that, you never thought it would happen, but it did. And we got along in the aspect that a father and son would get along in any profession or any sport or any business, that you're going to have some disagreements. But as far as hating my father, that's probably one of the most absurd suggestions or statements that I've ever heard from anybody.
Yeah, and like I said, when he said that on the air, I was really surprised because it just didn't seem to make sense and from what I had heard in history. Now, he did say that the boys were paid very poorly. This is something I've heard from many sources, and it's from both your father as the owner of the promotion and Jarrett as owner of the promotion. Are you going to deny that the guys were really undercut payoff-wise?
To me, it was paid accordingly on who it was and what they did and how they performed. Of course, even today, no matter what somebody is paid, everybody wants a little bit more. And that's even in wrestling or even professional football, baseball, basketball, or whatever.
Yeah, but George, $15 a night, I mean, come on.
Okay, so right now, some of the promotions now are paying $5 a night or maybe actually DVDs. So, I mean, you can look and see that money back then, of course, $50 back then or $65 is a lot different than what it means now. But to see that kind of pay now, unless you're in the higher echelon like WWE and TNA, you're not going to get the big bucks, especially now. So it's almost contradicting what you're saying. Back then, if you got $250 for a main event, see what that's worth now. Maybe $1,000, maybe $1,500.
Well, you make a point in that the independent circuit today, there are probably guys working for $25 or $50. But do you feel that your father paid all the guys on the shows properly, or do you think sometimes your father took advantage of some of the guys? Really?
Well, probably not. Just like anybody else in promotions back then, they're going to pay what they think they should pay, but that's them, and whoever owned that company is going to pay how they feel, and you can also suggest maybe she got a little more or whatever, but if that person is the one paying, it's going to go through deaf ears, and it could be my father, it could be Jarrett, it could be John Smith or whoever. It's just that that's how they felt they wanted to pay that particular night to those guys. Sure, even myself, I thought maybe I should have made more in certain places. But what are you going to do? You can't buck City Hall, as you may say, so you go off the flow. But eventually you're going to get more somewhere else down the road. And It's just like, go ahead.
No, fair enough, and I understand. Now let me ask you this. In the interview with Frank gave the it is true that Jerry Jarrett defeated your father in the promotion award. Jerry Jarrett took over. And from what I got from the interview with Frank, soon thereafter, all the money was in your mother's name. Your mother passed away around 1980. Hold on. This is what was in the interview.
Yeah.
Your mother passes away. She leaves all the money to you. Your father suddenly is penniless. He goes to the poorhouse, and he dies within a few years later. So your mother passes in 1980. Your father passes in 82. But you've told me off air that doesn't correlate with the actual facts.
No, my mother passed away in 86, and my dad died in 91. So right there is something that was years apart, and that can tell you right there, if you can't get the right year or date, then you're way out of the ball game. You're in left field without a glove.
Now, and I agree with you. I agree with you on that because the dates are way too far off from what Frank said. Now, also, he said that when your father was he kept calling it the poorhouse. I don't even know what that is, but he said that he had false teeth made of platinum. And I don't even know if there's such a thing as platinum false teeth, but he kind of claimed in a way that somebody had taken the false teeth and then sold them. Did your dad have platinum false teeth?
No, I've not even heard of it. Matter of fact, I even called my dentist to ask him, and he kind of laughed and said, well, George, what have you been smoking? There's no such thing as platinum teeth. And I even just called just to clear my mind because I've never heard of it. And he said, he's been in dentistry now going on 35 years, and if it is, he'd like to know where it's at because you'd make a lot of money, whoever's got those kind of teeth. So, and to say that I took teeth out of my dad's mouth, I mean, that's like taking food out of a dog's mouth that hasn't eaten in 2 weeks, or a human. I mean, that is really something that's way off that nobody would even think about even saying, much less stating.
Did you ever file a lawsuit against your father?
Heavens no. Matter of fact, there was no money left in my mother's so-called account that when my dad got where he wasn't thinking right because of Alzheimer's and things like that, and he had stated that the office was sold by me, my father sold the office to Frank Neal Insurance on 8th Avenue, which is still in the present location, and then the wrestling office was moved to the fairgrounds because the sports arena was built for my father, and then right next to the sports arena, connected to the same building, was an office made for my father at the fairgrounds.
Okay, fair enough.
So to say I sold the building, he sold that to Frank Neal, and then the house was sold the day before it was foreclosed by a realtor in Nashville, and in turn, that money was taken, and we purchased a home in Brentwood, Tennessee, which is just a few miles out of Nashville. And to say I sold the house and kept the money, that money was never even put anywhere. It was sold with the office and also the house to be moved to another home. So that was another thing that caught me to say, how can I sell the office and the home when I knew exactly what happened to both of those particular items?
And also, Frank said you were, at this point, one of the wealthiest men in Tennessee. Is that from money you had gotten from your father? And that
No, because like I said, even my father's attorney had asked me what happened to Nick Gulas' money. And we searched and searched and searched, and we came up with a couple of things that maybe the money went to. And I don't mind telling you what happened or where it went because it was made public, and it was shocked to me that most of the money that was taken from my father when he wasn't in his right mind thinking right was basically, most of it was from his own blood and relative sister in Birmingham, Alabama, that took some of the money, or maybe half of it, to do things with, like saying, I want to get this money to do this for your late mother and things like that. And then, of course, my father would hear that, and would go on and do it. This was told years after. Then the other thing was there was a couple that took care of my father in the later years, of course, when my father wasn't thinking right, and they lived in this area in Nashville, and they would take him places, take him to eat, and take him here and there. And they were a young couple, and then through a reliable source, I heard they took the rest of his money because they said, well, if we're going to take you and take care of you, then we want some out of this.
Right.
And
so George,
that's where some of that went.
So George, you don't have $20 or $30 million buried in a coffee can in the backyard. As
I wish I did. I wouldn't be refereeing and umpiring fast pitch softball. I'd be somewhere on my yacht or Learjet somewhere in the Bahamas or the Caribbeans or Hawaii and just taking life easy and not going through what I'm doing now, which I am enjoying doing. But to have that much, that's totally impossible. I wish I did.
What's your relationship with Frank? It's obvious you guys aren't close. Were you ever close?
Well,
Frank Morrell, by the way.
We wasn't very close, but when I saw him about a year or so ago, I mean, he was open arms and hugged me, and we presented little small miniature wrestling rings to the wrestlers in the past besides him, several others. We took a picture together. I was with a picture with him and Gypsy Joe. I've got that hanging on my bulletin board behind my lounge chair in the den, along with other wrestlers. And it surprised me with the comments he made when that particular night it was like we were the best of friends, and it was good to see you, and I wish we could break bread together.
Yeah, it's really surprising, and what bothered me, the interview shocked me. I'll tell you the truth. I was just surprised at what he was saying. I mean, we've heard a lot of stories about wrestling in Tennessee throughout the years, but what bothered me is when you called me and said the dates were all wrong. That's kind of a big problem because if your dad died 6 years after your mother and he's saying your father died, it gets confusing. Now, you of course, would know. George, let me ask you this, George. I want to ask you some questions about your dad's territory. Was your dad a wealthy man in the early and mid-'70s?
Yes, I can say he was. As far as the actual figures, I really don't know, and that's the God's truth. I don't know, but yes, he was because, a lot of money was made in this area, especially in the major cities, as well as the small cities that he ran for over 40 years.
Now, I've heard stories that your dad didn't like the boys because the boys had abused him when he had a lower position in the industry, dating back maybe to the 1940s or the 50s. I didn't get this from Frank. I got it from somebody else. Did your dad like the guys that worked for him, or did he not like the guys that worked for him, the wrestlers?
I'm sure, just like in any professional sport, there were favorites, and I'm sure he had favorites that he liked more than others. But as far as the 40s or 50s, what you heard could have been true. Of course, I wasn't, born by then. But, as far as who he liked, who he didn't like, I'm sure that's that way now that, you got your favorites. And sure, there may be some he really didn't like. And so those people take it to heart to say, well, he hates everybody because there was so, I guess there wasn't like the clique or the group or whatever that was particularly like others. And, of course, that's like that now in any professional sport, or even organizations like officials or umpires or whatever. It's just been a stigma against everybody since day one, and they'll continue doing this after we're dead and gone.
George, a lot of wrestling historians, and I don't consider myself a historian at all, but they have told me that the reason your dad went out of business and went broke was because he pushed you in the ring, because he featured you as main event talent. They've said that you were not a top talent. And do you feel responsible for the Gulas promotion eventually going out of business?
No, because I was on the main event every week. And, to state the father-son thing, let's look. In Minnesota, you got the Gagnes. In Texas, you got the Funks, the Von Erichs. In Florida, you got the Grahams. In Tennessee, you got the Gulases and you got the Jarretts. What father's not going to push their son to be on top in anything? Yes, maybe I wasn't the best. Who to say who is the best? Good old Lou Thez one time said some of these new wrestlers don't know an arm bar from a salad bar. So it goes back to who you are. But that's, to me, most of that is jealousy. Professional jealousy has done a lot of things, and to say that I was the best, no, I wasn't the best. Who is the best? I mean, the only person I think's the best and never committed to sin and was nailed to the cross was Jesus. I mean, everybody can say who's the best or whatever.
George,
but there's only one person who's the best.
George,
sure, you may be not as good as somebody else,
right.
And that's in sports too, like basketball, baseball.
Well,
but sure, who you are and who your father was, even goes back to the days of Pete Maravich had played basketball for his father, Press Maravich at LSU. It was stated, well, he's going to do anything he wants to do because his father's the coach. So it's going to be a stigma. And like I mentioned, the different promotions back then, it had fathers and sons. All of them were ridiculed at one time or another, and that's also included Jarrett's here, just because the father-son relationship. And I mentioned that in Texas and Minnesota and Florida.
George.
So, yes, I wasn't the best.
George, I want to clear this up once and for all so that we get past the rumors and we get to what really happened. Who trained you to be a professional wrestler?
Gorgeous George Jr. and Tojo Yamamoto. Gorgeous George actually was the one that started, and then Dennis Hall came in and gave me some pointers, but Gorgeous George actually was 75% of it. At the office on Franklin Road, 8th Avenue, downstairs below the office, we had a ring put up in a room which is sized as a triple garage.
Did they tell you that they thought you had talent because you had talent, or did they tell you had talent because your father was Nick Gulas? I mean,
probably a little of both, but mostly because of talent. Because they figure, well, if you're not going to do anything right or do good, why waste your time to train somebody? Just like you train a referee now. Yeah, you've got talent, but if he don't have enough later on down the road, you'll find out then. So I don't think somebody will waste their time to try to train somebody that thinks it's not something there. Sure, it may not materialize to be world's champion or the best, but, you know, it still goes back to the person and what that person was. If I was just John Smith from whoever where, yes, I probably would have got more push and more favorable criticism instead of negative because it's who I was instead of who I wasn't. Right now, today, who I was has hurt me in other aspects because they think, well, George Gulas was a pro wrestler. Nick Gulas was the promoter. He was on television. He was in the public eye. So there's still jealousy today that has nothing to do with wrestling, but the other things. If I went to another state as just a strictly referee and umpire, I probably would be a heck of a lot better because they'd know me as a referee and umpire, not as a former wrestler or my dad was a former promoter. So, yes, it's hurt me in other aspects as of today, as we speak. No, go ahead.
George, did you feel comfortable when you got in the wrestling ring? Did you feel like you were coordinated enough to be in the ring with the top pros?
Yes, I'd say 75, 80% of the time. Of course, you went against the bigger names or whatever, probably not. It's just like if you was playing basketball and I put you in a game against, say, Kevin Garnett or Artest or Kobe Bryant, you probably would not feel comfortable like some of the players would if they went against somebody that was like that now. I mean, that's in everything. You feel how you feel when you go into that squared circle on that court, how you go against somebody, and you know deep down it's out of my league. I'm way out of this.
So did you feel like you were out of your league? You step into the ring, do you feel like I'm comfortable here, this is my home, or do you feel like, you know what, I got no business being in here, I should get in the back and maybe help my dad run the ship instead of trying to be in the ring?
I'd say about 9 out of 10 times I felt comfortable. I mean, when I went against the ex-world champion Harley Race, that was probably the best match I ever had in my career. And I enjoyed that more than anything. I learned more from him in, say, 1 hour than I learned in 3 or 4 years from somebody else. So, yes, there were some wrestlers that you went against, respected who you were, and most of the time I did, that's how it was. And very few times it wasn't. So I'm thinking that what you hear, even if it goes back to last year, and it was a lot of animosity with Jarrett and my dad, but I saw Jarrett at a funeral. A lady wrestler passed away in our area for many years, and we exchanged phone numbers after the funeral. We laughed and talked. We was going to call one day and go out to eat, and there was no animosity between that. And I never today have heard Jarrett say one bad word about my father. It's been through somebody else. Now, maybe back in the day, it may be a comment or two, but I think it's jealousy there because things were working well, and then after you hear say or they say, that's when wars start, and that's when split-ups occur. Sure, you may say this person helped split this particular area up or this rest or whatever, but no, that's usually excuses because other people made things happen because of other people's comments. Just like the Frank Morrell comment has started a small war about things not even halfway true, especially my dad's dates when he passed away or my mother.
Well, George, a lot of this stuff has been out there for years as far as your ability in the ring, which is subjective, and how it allegedly cost your father his promotion. So I'm giving you the chance, and I really want to hear what you have to say, because a long time ago, and it's going to get lost in history otherwise. Let me ask you this. When Jarrett split from your father, were there hard feelings with Jarrett?
I guess hard feelings could be the word, disappointment. When the split occurred, our four top names here were Jerry Lawler, Bill Dundee, Tojo Yamamoto, and Jackie Fargo. Now, it was stated when the split occurred which of all of these wrestlers would go with either Nick or Jerry. Now, it was a surprise when Jarrett found out that two of the four wasn't going with him. And the two that stayed on my father's end was Tojo and Jackie Fargo. And it was asked, why were you not going to Jarrett's along with Dundee and Lawler? And then Tojo and Jackie's comment was, Nick Gulas was the one that brought us in the late 50s and early 60s, and whoever brings us in will stay with them to the end. And that was a surprise because everybody thought all four would go with him. And it really wasn't hatred, it was a dislike because it was hard feelings because what was said and how things were done. Sure, I was put into the middle, just like if Jeff Jarrett said, well, he was put into the middle. And if Jeff Jarrett was put into the middle because of his father, he got ridiculed too because it still goes back to the father-son thing, which will go on and on and on. So that was the basic story about the four main headliners, who went with who. Okay. And it was surprised because everybody thought those four all would go with Jerry.
And I understand that. Now, let me ask you this. Your father's attendance figures dropped off dramatically. How come now Lawler and Dundee were younger talent at the time? I was always surprised Jackie Fargo didn't seem to draw that well for your father at that point. Was there a reason that Tojo and Jackie weren't anywhere near the equal to Lawler and Dundee as draws?
They wasn't pushed enough in this area because most of the time Jackie wrestled in Memphis along with Tojo. And if it was in 8 weeks, they may be there 6, and then you may see them in Birmingham or Nashville or Chattanooga. But it was hard, especially with the Birmingham-Memphis on the same night, to have Fargo in Birmingham every week, where outside of 52 weeks a year, 40 of those weeks he was in Memphis. So that's why you can say they didn't draw as well. They wasn't pushed enough, but when they were here, they held their own how they drew, because even today in this area, you talk about Jackie Fargo, people said, yes, I remember him in Tojo like yesterday.
What happened to your dad financially within 6 months of the split from Jarrett, within 6 months?
That's at that particular time, my dad, when he wanted to get out, his main intention was to take care of my mother and take her and cruise around the world or enjoy time with her. They were married 45 years. And at that particular time, when he got out, it was only a year or 2.5 years, my mother got sick with cancer and passed away. So at that particular time, my dad's mind went to where she died, a part of me is gone. And so everything he had, monetary value or whatever, started going here, there, and everywhere. And like I said, we found out basically where 80% of the money went. The other, who knows where it went. So he kind of went after my mother passed away. And, of course, losing the business was the biggest mistake because most of them told my father, why don't you keep Nashville and Birmingham? The Birmingham's your home where you were born. Nashville's where you live. Keep your mind occupied, and you'll live a better life. Well, no, I want to take my mother, and I want to take my wife, George's mother, and just spend time with her with the time I lost with her. Well, he lost her, and so he should have kept those towns, and who knows how long he would have lived because he would occupy his mind with something he loved for so many years when he was a promoter for this area and the areas around.
So you think your father got careless with his money after your mother died?
Yes, because you could see a decline in his health and also his mind, and that's even when one of the local banks here made my dad sign a foreclosure over because they wanted to take the home away on Franklin Road. And then when I found out, I called the attorney, and the attorney said, oh, my God, what has he done? He's done something now that's in writing. And the day before it was foreclosed, my closest friend I played basketball with for many years as a realtor sold that particular house because my dad had signed papers not knowing, because he brought them home to me, and I read them. I said, Dad, why'd you do this? He said, well, I was told to do this at the bank because that particular person at the bank wanted to foreclose on the home. So luckily we got it sold the day before because it had been auctioned off for nothing.
It was a beautiful mansion, right?
Yes, it was. Well, it wasn't next door to Hank Williams' house.
Yeah, that's what he said. Hank Williams
down.
Jr. and your dad were neighbors.
Right, there were 7 houses down. Matter of fact, I went to Overton High School with Hank Williams Jr. up through the 9th grade. After 9th grade, he went on the road as a musician, and he had a tutor. But the home was about a half a mile apart. It wasn't right next door. Among others was Webb Pierce, Ronnie Millsap. All of them lived close by, Brenda Lee, Minnie Pearl. And this was all within a mile and a half or 2 mile radius. Marty Robbins, Dolly Parton, everybody lived in this area. Even little Jimmy Dickens lived about a mile and a half from where we lived. So it was an area that all the country music singers lived besides the Hendersonville area.
So describe this mansion that your father lived in. Is it got servants and...
No, we didn't have servants. We had a tennis court in the back, a basketball court. It was painted pink because my mother loved the color pink, and it had 4 bedrooms and 3 baths. It had a huge den, probably 20 feet by 20 feet. We could almost sit there and have a party in there and still have room to do other things. Also, besides that, at one time my dad had 2 Go wrestlers on top of the mailbox, and many a times those wrestlers were stolen because people wanted a piece of the action by taking the Go wrestlers. Even the tour buses would stop when they went out that way because the country music singers, and they would say, this is the home of Nick Gulas, the wrestling promoter. But there were things like that he put out there because he loved the business, but to take wrestlers off a mailbox, eventually that was told not to do that anymore because you'll lose them every other day. So, yes, it was a house, but not per se a mansion worth millions. Of course, back then, the price of a home back in the 60s was a lot less than what it'd be worth now. Now, that particular home today is worth 4 times more. But at that particular point, yes, it's probably one of the better homes out there because it was out there with the rest of those so-called country music celebrities and other. Matter of fact, the person across the street owned the Nashville Tennessean and Nashville Banner newspaper. We had 2 papers here, the Tennessean and the Banner, and he was the owner of one of them that lived right across the street from us. So,
now, George,
yes, it was yeah.
Did your dad have a lot of memorabilia from wrestling stashed away in that house? A lot of our listeners might be curious about championship belts and programs and pictures. Did he save stuff like that?
I've got pictures going back to the 50s and 60s. Now, as far as the belts, that was sold to somebody that wanted that belt, and I sold that about 3 or 4 years ago because that belt was no use to me here, and they wanted that belt. There's a promotion in the Kentucky area that bought that particular belt, and they've got that. as far as pictures and ads and advertisements and newspaper articles, I've got about 80% of that in my home as we speak, and we're going back into the 60s, and I even got some old pictures and a program from the Hippodrome, which was back in the late 50s.
Wow.
So I've got a lot of that stuff here that I can look back and see who wrestled in Chattanooga or Huntsville, Alabama, or Birmingham in the 60s and 70s, and basically also the little booking sheets that people got, like on Monday they went Birmingham, Tuesday Louisville, Wednesday Nashville, and so forth. I've got some of those that was made out back in the 70s. So all that I've got here put up, locked, because that's something I'll never get rid of.
How badly do you miss being in the spotlight of professional wrestling? It must be hard to adjust to life afterwards.
It is. And I guess that's why I actually took up officiating basketball in high school and college and umpiring softball in college and high school, because you're kind of in the limelight there because you're in control. You're the official. You're the umpire. You're out in front of thousands of people. So that may be my fix to be me not in the ring. I miss wrestling terribly. But what you see now and what you see in the past, as an old saying says by a lot of people, the older promoters now would have turned over their grave hundreds of times what they see now.
George,
it's a shame.
Let me ask you this, and you've heard it. I know you've heard it. When people say that you're one of the, and I'm not saying it because I never saw you wrestle, so I'm just asking you from people who have seen you, because I grew up on the East Coast, but people have said that you're one of the 5 worst professional wrestlers ever in the ring. Does that hurt you, or do you just brush it off?
Both. I mean, I'm glad I'm not the worst, 1 to 5. I mean, I'm in the top 5, but I'm not the worst. So it hurts some, but what is that to say because it was said because who I was? If just say I was George Duncan, I probably would not be the worst 5, maybe be the worst 15. So it still goes back to who you were and who your father was. And that still goes back to the jealousy. Sure, I'm not the best. Who says I am? I'm not the best official. I'm one of the best. And in wrestling, I think I held my own. But do you see people today, and I'm talking about regular fans, not wrestlers, not promoters, not so-called people who think they know about wrestling, but's in there for a reason, but not know everything about it. They still say, I used to watch you and Tojo and beautiful Bobby Eaton as the Jet Set wrestle for years. So I don't look at what wrestlers say or what promoters say or what people in wrestling say. You look at what the fans say, because if the fans looked at you and said, well, you were terrible or you weren't one of my favorites, I mean, just the other day in a restaurant, you would stop and said, I remember you when you wrestled. I'd like to have your autograph. I mean, this is years I've been out of the ring, 20 years on television.
George, hold on. George,
George,
when they say that you're one of the worst 5, and you've heard it, and I've heard it, and everyone's heard it, do you think to yourself that that's true or that's not true? Or do you immediately think, you know what, it's just because my dad and I got, I'm getting overly, they're getting overly critical with me?
I think because my father, like I told you earlier on the interview about the other father-son's combinations in the other states. And, sure, those wrestle a lot better than me. I can say that. But still, you always heard, well, you can't go to Texas because the Von Erichs are there and they got their sons on the main event. Or you can't go to Minnesota because of Greg Gagne, or Florida because of the Grahams, or so forth. So there may be better wrestlers, but still that stigma went all over the country because it's the father-son thing. And even when here with myself and also the Jarretts. So it's, you heard comments about Tennessee wrestling. Once somebody said one time, Tennessee wrestling. Well, when you go to Tennessee to wrestle, it's either you're on the way up or on the way down. And what does that make the wrestlers that started here, that my father started? He started a lot of wrestlers here that went on to bigger and better things. And that includes the Jarretts, the Fargos, the Laws, or whatever. Tennessee was ridiculed from day one. That comment was bad.
Well, I always liked Tennessee wrestling. I think it had a lot of excitement and a lot of action and a lot of creativity, and I think in some ways it's still living today with some of the crazy stuff that Vince does.
Right.
So, I think that people are over. But look, it's all a matter of opinion, George. George,
Right.
so it does bother you that people always have this negative impression of George Gulas.
Right, and of course, my dad being a foreigner, being a Greek, that didn't help either because that was a minority then. And of course, being a Greek and whatever, and stating about things my dad paid politicians or whatever. Who doesn't?
What about that? What about that?
Well, sure, my dad campaigned or gave money for a campaign. That goes on now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a big deal. My thing is, if you got paid X amount of dollars, like $200 or $250, who cares what somebody else got? Maybe you should have got the less of the two payoffs, and that person should have got the $250. So why worry about somebody else? That's like me today got a schedule of 23 ball games, and somebody got 27, and I'm going to be mad and say, well, why did he get 4 more games than me? If I don't keep my mouth closed, I won't get my 23.
George,
so why worry about what somebody else made? Take what you got. If you made more than that person, consider yourself, I was lucky, or I deserve that. But that didn't coincide, too, because I don't worry what somebody else has. I worry what I've got. Now, if it was a discrepancy and it kept on going, yeah, you would say something. But, just like, of course, saying about my father, and about the wrestling office or whatever.
Yeah.
I received a letter, Gary, about a week ago from the executive director of the Tennessee State Fair, Buck Dozier,
Yep.
which I've known for years. And if you don't mind, I like to read this because this may answer some questions of what they thought of my father. And these are people not in the wrestling business. Not too long. It's only a paragraph and a half.
Yeah,
but I think the listeners would like to hear what he said about my father and about a building, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, George.
I like to read that.
It's all yours, man.
Okay? It says, Dear George, I have waited this long to respond to your request, which I agreed to name the sports arena after your father. I know of no one else who would deserve that honor more than he did. His name is synonymous with wrestling in this community. Since our conversation, much has taken place out here. I delayed the naming due to the uncertainty of our future. As you have probably heard, the board plans to close this place June 30th, 2010. I'm sure that the grounds will be sold in most, if not all, the buildings will be torn down. It does not appear that the mayor will choose to rebuild another exposition center grounds. If he does, I will push to name a building after your father. I feel badly that I could not do what I promised, but it's out of my hands. I hope you're doing well. My best wishes to you, Buck. And he is the executive director of the Tennessee State Fair. Now, if my dad was such a bad person or whatever, would they go to the extreme to write a letter and maybe name the sports arena if the building stayed the Nick Gulas Sports Arena? The mayor was probably going to do that. But now, since the fairground's not going to be here, he hopes to get another site for the fairgrounds. And if a building is put up, want it to be named after my father. To me, that was a letter I will cherish because he didn't have to do this or go to the mayor to ask this to be done. Now, with our fairgrounds in limbo here, which will probably be torn down because just the other day they locked the gates of Nashville Speedways, which they had racing there from way back in the 40s. There's no more racing at the fairgrounds. So now you see this place going to particularly be nothing in the next 6 months.
Well, it's congratulations to your family for that type of recognition. George, was there a reason that you never went and worked for another promotion? I never saw you at WCW. I never saw you at WWF. Did you try and get into one of the major promotions?
No, because I was really strictly happy for what I was doing here in that particular time. After I started wrestling in 73 and 74, it wasn't 5 or 6 years later, I got into the profession of officiating and umpiring. And then after I got out of wrestling, I went back to college and got my teaching certification, and I taught school for 11 years.
Wow.
Maybe I wish I didn't. I went to other areas to wrestle when I was a wrestler, to Detroit and Florida and places like that, just to wrestle for several days and come back. But, that's hindsight. That's 2020.
George,
Maybe if I had to do it over again.
Do you think you could?
I wasn't.
Do you think
the
you
son
could?
of Nick Gulas, maybe I would have, but then maybe I wouldn't. So
do you think
you can't go back and retrace history because that's over and done. Once you cross the sidewalk, you can't go back and start over.
Yeah,
again.
I know. But tell me this: do you think you could have headlined maybe in the WWF or Detroit or Los Angeles or Texas with the Von Erichs, or do you think that would have been tough for you?
No, I wouldn't. I'm gonna be honest because most of the people now would say, "Oh yeah, I'd go anywhere and be." No, I wouldn't. I'm just saying like from the horse's mouth. No, I wouldn't. I may be on the underneath card and maybe first, second match or whatever, but no, I wouldn't be on the main event. And how many would say to their own self, no, I wouldn't be on the main event? They'd say, oh yeah, I'd be up there with the big ones. No, you wouldn't because your ego's too big to say that you would. No, I wouldn't. And I'm just being frank and honest. Sure, I may got pushed more here because of my father. And who wouldn't be if the father's son is anywhere else? Sure, the Von Erichs and the Funks and all those, they were fantastic wrestlers. They went anywhere to wrestle. But still, the stigma was there that if you went to that area, your chance to be on the main event was too slim and none because you couldn't overpower them. But yet they were fantastic wrestlers. And today, you haven't heard anybody say anything about those people because they don't come back and say, well, 32 years ago, so-and-so and so-and-so, they go on to live their life. It's certain wrestlers today that never were that great themselves come back and start saying things about people that wasn't true because for some reason, we don't know. Only them and God knows why they say those things. Just like the interview we heard about Frank Morrell. I'm still shocked today, especially with what we gave him last year and being so nice and hadn't seen you in a while. But like I said, what do we know what's inside a person's mind or why they do things? We don't know.
Wow. Incredible. I don't know. I think it's important that we get the story out. It comes from each guest's opinion, but like you said, you're the son of the father and, your mother, and you know when they passed away and if you had a good relationship with them or not. No one would know like you would. George, were you ever involved in any shoots inside the ring? Did it ever get physical? I've heard some of the guys say that they wanted to ambush you in the ring. Did that ever happen?
I heard that once or twice. I mean, yeah, I've heard that. And, I had the old wrestler, Lou Thez, said that if you got in trouble any time, I'll know that, and I'll come in to help you because, like I said, that has no place in the wrestling ring, and most of that's done because of animosity and hatred. And so, yes, you had people say, I'll be on your, I'll help you, just like today, and things happen to somebody, well, I'll be your backup, or I'll be there for backup. It's just like, you don't know why things happen or why things are said and done. And basically, it's because who the person is. And, this goes on besides even being a father-son thing. It's who they think they don't like, and it's like a baseball pitcher can throw a ball at some batter, and hit them, and, I'm sorry, it was an accident. Well, that happens in baseball. In football, just last week, a Florida player supposedly gouged an eyes of a Georgia player, and they showed that on the screen. This is college football. This is not professional. So when people get mad or have hatred about a certain situation or person, they'll try to do something to them, sure. That's going to go on.
I want you to answer the question. Were you involved in shoots in the ring?
No.
Did anyone get overly rough at you as a way to send a message to your dad?
Yes, a couple of times, sure. But it really wasn't that bad, and it may not been just strictly because of that. They may have been mad because something didn't do right in the ring or something didn't go right.
Right.
And because who I was, I probably got a little bit more hatred because of that. But no, 99% of the time, none of that occurred. Matter of fact, most everybody was very cordial. And like I said, I'm not the best. I would consider to be the best. At least, I'm not the worst. I'm 1 to 5. But like I said, if I wasn't George Gulas,
wait a minute. George, you're joking when you say you're one of the worst 5. Do you feel that way about yourself?
If that's what people insinuate, I guess I am. To me, no. But
okay,
to what they say, what they say, I guess I'm going to have to go with what they say. Just like, this past week, the 5 most hated football players, and one of our Tennessee Titans was number 5, and then one was number 6. His comment was last night, hey, I'm glad I'm one of the top 10. I hope I go from 6 to number 1. If I'm hated that much, hey, I want to go for the gusto.
George, when was your last match? When did you officially have your final match and retire? What year?
Okay, I wrestled from 1974 up to about 1978. 88, 89. And my last actual match was about 9 or 10 years ago in a small town named Columbia, Tennessee. But I actually wrestled 16 to 18 years from 1974 up through the late 80s.
What kind of shape?
Actually, when my mother died, that's when I finally got out altogether. Of course, the business was sold, and my dad went everywhere I went to officiate basketball and umpire. So I actually got out right when my mother got sick because I knew that my dad would decline rapidly, and if him wasn't going with me to these different areas where I officiated and umpired, my dad probably lived a year or 2 years instead of 6 years because his love of his life was gone when she died. So when she passed away and he sold the business, I actually wanted to get out altogether because I was really refereeing, umpiring hot and heavy, and I also did some broadcasting on radio and television for local college and high schools in this area during that time. So I had more coals in the fire than I needed, and I didn't need to stay in the wrestling because of what happened, what transpired, and, of course, the betterment between the split or whatever. I guess the good Lord said, go on and do something else, which I can say I was blessed because there's a lot of wrestlers right now, like you say, the older ones, that after they got out of wrestling, they can't do anything else. There's no career or nothing there.
George, how beat up is your body?
Okay, I'm glad you asked me that. The past 4 years, my physician is Dr. Burton Elrod, who is the team physician of the Tennessee Titans. He told me, with my wrestling and what I've been through, I'm lucky enough to be refereeing 27 years, probably 15 would have been it. I've had 3 knee surgeries on my right knee. I've had 2 knee surgeries on my left knee. I just had a thumb operation about 6 weeks ago, and the other thumb I had 10 years ago. At this particular point, my back is so out of shape, I've got to get almost a massage after I referee because it's taking a toll on me. He said I need a knee replacement. If I have that, I can't referee basketball anymore. I can umpire, but I can't go up and down the floor anymore. And he said 80 to 90% of your problem right now today, besides, of course, you're getting older, is that wrestling destroyed what you had. And it was really funny. Steve McNair, the quarterback, was in a situation where he couldn't get out of bed in the mornings because he was so sore and hurting. And Dr. Elrod one time said, I've got 2 knuckleheads as patients. Steve McNair plays and lives in pain, and George Gulas umpires and referees in pain, and they can't describe pain because they live in pain. And, of course, he was taking Sully from this earth back on 4th of July. Yeah. But it's taking a toll on me. And that was told by my father and others. The older you get, you're going to realize what it's taking because your body wasn't made and accustomed to take all the bumps, the falling out of the floor, the particular holes, all that. Your body wasn't made to be a wrestler. And sure, when you're young and you're gunning for this and that, you don't feel that. But when you get older, look at some of the poor wrestlers now. They need a cane to walk, some in wheelchairs, some can't walk. I'm still blessed I can referee basketball at my age because I was told by my supervisor, you have a body and you referee like you're 30 years old. And that was a compliment because people sometime my age would never think about going up and down the floor, running and refereeing basketball at my age. So, yes, it's taking a toll. If it wasn't for wrestling, I'd probably be in much better health. From 1 to 10, I'd say I'm about a high 7 or a low 8. But that's because of what I went through.
George, George,
I'll probably be a 9 or 10.
George, are you planning a book about your life?
I was asked many times about that by several editors and people. I should, because what I know and the facts I know that are the truth would be a great book. Maybe one day I will. I know it's going to take time and effort, but if you get somebody who really wants to do it with you, and I was approached by 3 or 4 people, yes, it'd be good to have a book to know exactly what actually happened, not bits and pieces or they say or he says, because of jealousy, animosity, hatred. You don't write things because of that. You write things because of fact. And people would like to actually see or read or hear what actually happened instead of hearsay. Hearsay can get yourself in a lot of trouble. Remember the old saying, if you can't say something good about somebody, don't say anything at all. And know every fact and piece of it before you put things together, because one false statement can get yourself in a lot of trouble or cause a lot of problems.
George,
and that is going on and on.
Well, George, it's difficult to know exactly always what's true and what's not true in the world. I mean, let's be realistic. Come on.
Right.
I mean, you know, sometimes 2 different people look at 2 different situations from 2 different points of view. There is no one universal truth, even though, of course, if you're close enough to someone, you know what your relationship with them was, at least in your own viewpoint. George, will you join us again on 57taught.com?
I'll be glad anytime you want me to come back on.
The people want to hear. The people want to hear more about your career. I wanted to talk to you about the situation with Frank. We've been able to clear a lot of it up, but I'd like to go back in time, a classic day in wrestling, and what it was like actually working in the ring with Bobby Eaton and some of the other greats. So we're going to give you another call. Is that fair?
That'd be fine. Anytime you want to call, give me a call. I'll be glad to come back on because I enjoyed this. We finally got ourselves together, but for weeks and months and years we tried. So it looks like the good Lord has put us together today, and hopefully we'll have a good relationship. I can come back on and talk about other things, and I'm glad this is the start of something good.
Thanks, George. Have a nice day.
You too, Gary.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.